You've been told your whole life that if you just work harder, you'll get ahead. But what if that's the biggest lie ever told to keep you poor? What if the system isn't broken at all, but working exactly as designed to make sure you stay right where you are while wealth flows upward? The American Myth Exposed. I'm Tom, and this is Tom Thinks. I'm here to cut through the Wall Street jargon and give you the real talk on your money, even if it hurts your feelings a little bit. If you're someone who works 60 hours a week but still can't seem to get ahead, if you're watching your paycheck disappear while everything gets more expensive, hit subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Now look, here's the thing. We've all been fed the same story since we were kids. Work hard in school, get a good job, save your money, and you'll be successful. It's the American dream. But what if I told you that story is what a 30-year Federal Reserve veteran calls the myth? Jeff Fuhrer spent decades inside the Fed, attending those secret monetary policy meetings in Washington, watching how the sausage gets made. And after 30 years, he had a revelation that changed everything. He realized that the problem in struggling communities wasn't a lack of industry, perseverance, or innovation. It was structural. The economy itself had been designed to set people up to fail by denying them opportunities for success. Now, here's what most people don't realize. This isn't about individual effort. This is about a system that was built with certain outcomes in mind. When the Fed did research on racial wealth disparities in Boston, they found something shocking. Number H, the racial wealth gap wasn't an accident. It was the product of decades of policy design and implementation that boosted white families' wealth while systematically excluding black families. Think about that for a second. The outcomes were economic, but the sources were political and intentionally discriminatory. This veteran economist, trained at Princeton and Harvard, had never heard about this in all his years of mainstream economics training. That's because the narrative we're taught that success goes to those who work hard, failure to those who don't, serves a very specific purpose. It makes us blame ourselves when we struggle, rather than questioning the system itself. Here's where it gets interesting. The myth isn't just wrong, it's corrosive. It's disrespectful to millions of people who are barred from achieving success through no fault of their own. Every time you see a motivational speaker telling you to dream big and work hard, the myth rears its ugly head. But here's the secret. Hard work is often required to succeed, but it's far from sufficient in our economy. The system has been designed to produce inequality, so in that sense, it's not broken at all. It's doing exactly what it was built to do. The Fed's real game. Now let's talk about the Federal Reserve, because understanding this institution is crucial to understanding how the system is rigged. The Fed was created in 1913 after a series of financial panics, particularly the severe panic of 1907. On paper, its job is to promote maximum employment and stable prices, what they call the dual mandate. But here's what they don't tell you in economics class. The Fed operates through this complex structure with the Board of Governors in Washington, 12 regional banks, and something called the Federal Open Market Committee that sets interest rates. They influence the economy through three main tools: open market operations, the discount rate, and reserve requirements. Sounds technical, right? But here's the translation for regular people. When the Fed buys Treasury securities through open market operations, they're pumping money into the banking system. When they lower interest rates, they're making it cheaper for banks to borrow. And when they adjust reserve requirements, they're controlling how much money banks can lend out. Now, during the 2008 financial crisis, the Fed did something unprecedented. They lowered interest rates to near zero and started something called quantitative easing, basically printing trillions of dollars to buy assets. Here's the problem. All this money doesn't flow evenly through the economy. It flows to financial institutions first. Banks get this cheap money, and where does it go? Into assets, stocks, real estate, corporate bonds. The wealthy, who already own these assets, see their portfolios skyrocket. Meanwhile, regular people see their wages stagnate and their cost of living increase. This is where the system gets really clever. The Fed's actions have global implications. They affect currency exchange rates, international capital flows, emerging markets. But the average American just sees their grocery bill going up and their paycheck staying the same. Critics argue that the Fed's expanded role since 2008 has created moral hazard and asset price bubbles. And they're right. Think about it this way. If you're a billionaire with a stock portfolio, low interest rates and quantitative easing are like rocket fuel for your wealth. Your assets inflate in value. But if you're a working person trying to save for a house, those same policies make housing prices soar out of reach. The Fed faces this delicate task of engineering what they call a soft landing, bringing inflation under control without triggering a recession. But here's the dirty secret: their tools are blunt instruments that affect different people very differently. The institution's independence from political control is supposed to maintain credibility, but independence also means they're not directly accountable to the people whose lives they're affecting. When they raise interest rates to fight inflation, who gets hurt first? Not the wealthy with diversified portfolios. It's the working family with variable rate debt, the small business owner trying to expand, the recent graduate with student loans. Structural racism as design. Now, let's get uncomfortable for a minute because this is where the system's design becomes painfully clear. When that Fed veteran started looking at community development in low-income, often majority-minority communities, he discovered something that mainstream economics had completely missed. The problem wasn't the people, it was the structure. Here's what most people don't realize. Policies weren't just accidentally creating inequality, they were intentionally designed to do so. Take housing policy, for example. For decades, government programs systematically excluded black families from homeownership opportunities that were freely available to white families. Redlining, restrictive covenants, discriminatory lending practices. These weren't market failures. They were policy successes. And here's where it gets really interesting. Wealth isn't just about income, it's about assets. It's about home equity that gets passed down through generations. It's about being able to help your kids with college tuition or a down payment on their first house. When you systematically exclude an entire group of people from asset accumulation for generations, you create a wealth gap that becomes almost impossible to close. The myth that people of color achieve less success because they don't work as hard or because they make poor financial decisions is not just wrong, it's a convenient fiction that lets the system off the hook. The reality is that the deck was stacked from the beginning, and this isn't ancient history. The effects compound over time. Let me give you a concrete example. If your grandparents were able to buy a home in a neighborhood with good schools because of government-backed loans that weren't available to black families, that advantage gets passed down. Your parents might have gotten help with college from that home equity. You might have gotten help with your down payment. That's intergenerational wealth transfer. Now contrast that with a family that was excluded from those same opportunities. They're renting instead of owning. They're not building equity, they're not passing anything down. They're starting every generation from scratch. And then we wonder why there's a wealth gap. The system was designed to create exactly this outcome. Here's the thing about capitalism. In its ideal form, it can be a powerful engine for growth and innovation. But the version we have in America isn't some pure free market system. It's a particular flavor of capitalism that distributes success highly unequally based on initial conditions: race, ethnicity, place of birth, socioeconomic class. Markets might allocate resources efficiently in tranquil times, but they're completely silent on issues of inequality or structural racism. The narrative that we're a post-racist nation, that systemic racism never existed or no longer exists, is another part of the myth. It's used to dismiss initiatives to address the massive disparities in income, wealth, and employment. It lets people say, well, if they just worked harder, when the reality is much more complicated and much more intentional. The low-wage trap. Now let's talk about work, because this is where the myth hits closest to home for most people. Standard economic theory says that markets will efficiently determine job characteristics, including compensation. But here's what that Fed veteran discovered when he started looking at low-wage work. The theory has absolutely nothing to do with reality. Over time, employers have systematically scaled back wages, reduced benefits, contracted out low-wage jobs, and dismantled the unions that used to give workers a voice and bargaining power. This wasn't some natural market evolution. It was a deliberate strategy. And while everyone talks about improving education and skills, which is important, that completely misses the point. The blame lies with the norms our nation has come to accept for how employers treat employees in many sectors of the economy. Think about this. We have an entire economic philosophy popularized by Milton Friedman that says businesses must do one thing and one thing only: maximize shareholder value, profit above all else. Full stop. Now, here's what that looks like in practice. When the only metric that matters is the stock price, everything else becomes expendable. Worker wages? Expendable. Benefits? Expendable. Job security? Expendable. Training and development? Expendable. This philosophy has been used not just to make sense of our world, but to guide strategic decisions by business and government. And here's where it gets really perverse. According to the myth, government's role is to make sure markets operate freely and get out of the way of individual attainment. Less government is more. But what happens when you combine profit-maximizing businesses with a government that's stepping back from regulation and worker protection? You get exactly what we have today. wages that haven't kept up with productivity for decades, benefits that have been stripped away, an epidemic of contract work with no stability. And all of this is justified by the myth. If you're struggling, it must be because you're not working hard enough, not because the system has been deliberately redesigned to extract maximum value from your labor while giving you as little as possible in return. Let me give you some numbers that will make your head spin. If worker pay had kept pace with productivity growth since the 1970s, the average worker would be making about $30,000 more per year than they are today. $30,000. That's not a rounding error. That's a massive transfer of wealth from workers to shareholders. And here's the psychological trap. When you're working 60 hours a week just to keep your head above water, you don't have the time or energy to question the system. You're too busy surviving. The myth tells you that if you could just work a little harder, be a little more productive, you'd get ahead. But the reality is that no matter how hard you work, the system is designed to capture most of the value you create. This is what that Fed veteran meant when he said the narrative is corrosive. It makes people blame themselves for systemic problems. It creates shame where there should be anger. It keeps people docile when they should be demanding change. The wealth transfer machine. Now let's look at how all these pieces fit together into what I call the wealth transfer machine. This isn't about conspiracy theories. It's about understanding how different policies and institutions work together to move money from the working class to the wealthy. First, you have monetary policy from the Fed that inflates asset prices. Stocks, real estate, bonds all go up when money is cheap. Benefits. People who already own these assets. That's the wealthy. Regular people see their cost of living go up without corresponding wage increases. Second, you have tax policy. Over the past several decades, we've seen massive reductions in taxes on capital gains, dividends, and corporate profits. These are the ways the wealthy make their money. Meanwhile, payroll taxes that hit working people have remained high or increased. Result, the wealthy pay a lower effective tax rate than many middle-class families. Third, you have what economists call rent-seeking, using political influence to get favorable rules and regulations. This is where big corporations and wealthy individuals use their resources to shape policy in their favor. Subsidies, tax breaks, regulatory capture, it's all part of the game. Fourth, you have the erosion of worker power. Decline of unions, the rise of right-to-work laws, the classification of workers as independent contractors, all of these make it harder for workers to bargain for better pay and conditions. Now, here's where it gets really insidious. These policies don't exist in isolation. They reinforce each other. Low wages mean workers have less political power. Less political power means they can't stop policies that benefit the wealthy. Policies that benefit the wealthy mean more money for political influence. More political influence means more policies that benefit the wealthy. It's a vicious cycle, and the myth, the belief that success comes from hard work alone, keeps people from seeing the system for what it is. If you believe that billionaires deserve their wealth because of supreme intellect and Herculean effort, you're less likely to question why they pay lower tax rates than their secretaries. Let me give you a concrete example from recent economic forecasts. Growing healthcare costs and sluggish economic growth are putting pressure on state budgets. Wage growth is lower, consumer spending is weakening, and inflation remains elevated. Working families are experiencing an affordability crisis, but here's what's happening simultaneously. More giveaways are going to billionaires and big corporations. This isn't an accident, it's by design. The system has been refined over decades to continue heaping money and power on those who already have it, while denying access to everyone else. Tax policy, the safety net, labor laws, all have been shaped using the myth to exclude millions while ensuring success for the wealthiest. The result is what we see today: trillions for corporate bailouts and military spending, but pennies for people. Runaway defense spending while families struggle to afford healthcare. Tax cuts for the rich while critical services get cut. This is what a rigged system looks like in practice. Building wealth anyway. Now, here's the most important part. Knowing the system is rigged isn't an excuse to give up. It's the first step toward building wealth anyway. Because once you understand how the game is played, you can start playing it smarter. First, you need to understand that in a system designed to transfer wealth upward, your job is to make sure you're on the receiving end of those transfers, not the giving end. That means owning assets, not just earning income. When the Fed prints money and asset prices go up, you want to own those assets. Here's a concrete strategy. Instead of putting all your money in a savings account earning nothing, you need to be in the market. And I'm not talking about day trading or picking individual stocks. I'm talking about low-cost index funds that own a piece of the entire economy. When corporate profits go up, and they've been going up for decades while wages stagnate, you want to own a piece of those profits. Second, you need to understand leverage. The wealthy use debt strategically to acquire assets. They borrow money at low rates to buy real estate, businesses, and other income-producing assets. Regular people use debt to consume cars, vacations, stuff that depreciates. You need to flip that script. If you can get a mortgage at a reasonable rate to buy a property that will appreciate or generate rental income, that's using the system's tools to your advantage. If you're using high-interest credit card debt to buy consumer goods, you're feeding the wealth transfer machine. Third, you need to think intergenerationally. The system is designed to transfer wealth across generations for those who already have it. You need to start building something to pass down even if it's small. That means prioritizing assets over consumption even when it's hard. Here's a math example that will change how you think about money. If you skip a $1,000 vacation every year for 30 years and invest that money in a broad market index fund averaging 7% returns, you're not saving $30,000. You're building a $100,000 nest egg for your future self. That's the power of compound interest working for you instead of against you. Fourth, you need to build multiple income streams. In a system where employers have all the power, having all your eggs in one basket is dangerous. Side hustles, freelance work, rental income, dividend income, these create resilience. And this is crucial, you need to educate yourself about the system. Most people don't understand how monetary policy affects them. They don't understand tax-advantaged accounts. They don't understand how to use debt strategically. This knowledge gap is part of what keeps the system working. Here's the bottom line. The system is rigged. It was designed to create inequality, but that doesn't mean you're powerless. It means you need to play a different game than the one you've been told to play. Stop trying to outwork a broken system and start trying to outsmart it. Own assets. Use leverage strategically. Think long-term. Build multiple income streams. Educate yourself relentlessly. The myth wants you to believe that if you're not succeeding, it's your fault. The truth is that the deck is stacked. But once you know how the cards are marked, you can start playing your hand better. You can't change the entire system overnight, but you can change your position within it. And that's how you build wealth in a broken economy, by understanding the rules well enough to use them to your advantage, even when they were designed to work against you.
Found this interesting? Subscribe to the channel. Give this video a like, share it out, and drop your questions or ideas in the comments. Until our next adventure.